My best friend's boyfriend posted her private photos all over school until she couldn't take it anymore. At her funeral, he was fake crying while showing the same photos to his friends, so I beat him until his skull was paint on the sidewalk. Then his rich dad got me arrested for attempted murder, my mom fired from her job, and planted drugs in my locker, until the FBI found his hard drives with photos of dozens of girls and gave him 40 years in federal prison. Leah was my girl best friend and nothing more. She was genuinely like my little sister. My mom treated her like she was and also helped to set her up on dates with other boys. Leah was the most positive girl. Her laugh was so infection that no matter how bad the joke, you'd end up rolling on the floor with her laughing. Her world changed in 10th grade when she met Blake. He was varsity on the basketball team, had a Snapchat score of 2 million, and wore the tightest clothes humanly possible so his muscles and pecs would show. When Leah started talking to him, she tried to convince me that it was ironic, but I knew by the glimmer in her eye that she liked him, and I knew that when all was said and done, I would be the one licking her wounds clean. So I tried to convince her otherwise, but instead of listening to me, she just started texting him in secret, renamed his contact name to Mom, hid me from her Instagram story as if I wouldn't notice. But then something changed. Leah was happy, like really happy. She stopped wearing makeup and stopped dyeing her hair all the time. It was clear that he made her feel special. They'd walk through hallways holding hands and sometimes made out by the lockers. Fast forward to 4 months later, and they were still together, which meant it was Blake's longest relationship. By this point, everyone in the school was gossiping about them. Some girls even tried to test their relationship strength by sliding into his DMs. She was sleeping over at my house when he asked for intimate pictures. "Do you think I should?" she asked, her voice sheepish. When I read the texts, my stomach turned. "Darling, if you don't show me what's mine, then I'm gonna have to get off to that girl in my AP calculus class." Blake then proceeded to, in detail, describe how badly he wanted that girl, followed by how much of an amazing boyfriend he was for refraining. But before I could say anything, Leah ran into the bathroom and locked the door. I exhaled sharply, because I knew she had given in. When she came out, her face was all puffy from crying, but when I tried to ask if she was okay, she just turned off the light and went to sleep. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of her hyperventilating. Blake had blocked her on everything, and in school he was acting like she didn't exist. I didn't even have to say "I told you so," because it was obvious she already knew how dumb she was. But that night, I was proven wrong, because he actually unblocked her on everything and apologized for being so immature. But as soon as she forgave him, he asked for pictures again. This time, the texts were even worse. "If you don't send more, I'll just drop the ones you already gave me into our team group chat and get them to rate you out of 10. He reblocked her on everything, and they never spoke again. Until a week later, that is, because that's when Blake showed up to school with a gift. Plastered on every locker room door, hallway bulletin board, classroom whiteboard was a printed out photo of the photos she had sent. The girls were whispering. Guys were patting me on the back and congratulated me for getting a slice of Leah. Even some of the male teachers were ogling her, trying to look through her clothes as if they had X-ray vision. She immediately ran out to her car and drove home. For the entire month, Blake was known as the guy who bagged the baddest in the school. Meanwhile, Leah could barely even get out of bed. I tried to tell her there was nothing to be ashamed of, but she was too busy drowning in self-hatred to listen to me. And less than a month later, I was at her funeral, wearing the tie she once made fun of, because the shame was so suffocating that she thought the only way out was to take a handful of meds and abandon everything she loved. Blake was standing right across from me, with a smirk on his face. And when he thought no one was looking, he even showed his friend the photo that had started this entire thing. I was seeing red. That night, he hosted a party for her, and told everyone she was the Juliet to her Romeo, and even fake cried. I showed up at the very end, when he was plastered and everyone else had gone home. I asked him if he wanted a cigarette, and that F-face nodded like an idiot. Suddenly, I found myself beating him until his skull was practically paint on the sidewalk. I then unlocked his phone and took a photo of him and plastered it onto all of his social media, captioned, "Finally got what I deserve." Obviously, it got taken down pretty quickly, but not before the entire school had seen it. Lol. But teenage me forgot to account for one thing. Blake was rich, and it wasn't long before he taught me exactly how much power he had. The pounding on my door at 3 a.m. jolted me from sleep. My mom's terrified screams mixed with authoritative voices demanding I open up. I stumbled to the door in my boxers, still groggy, and found myself face to face with 4 police officers holding a warrant. They spun me around and cuffed me before I could even process what was happening. My mom stood in the hallway crying, begging them to explain. The lead officer read me my rights while another searched my room. They found nothing because there was nothing to find. At the station, Blake's father's lawyer was already waiting. He wore an expensive suit and carried a briefcase full of enhanced photos, showing Blake's injuries in gruesome detail. The swelling looked worse, the bruises darker. He demanded attempted unaliving charges, claiming I'd used a weapon. When my mom asked what weapon, he smiled coldly, and mentioned other options if our family cooperated. My mom emptied her savings account for bail. $8,000, everything she'd saved for emergencies. The public defender assigned to my case took one look at the file and shook his head. He explained that Blake's family owned half the town, including the bank that held the judge's mortgage. He suggested we consider a plea deal immediately. The school suspended me the next morning despite the pending trial. The principal cited zero-tolerance policies while Blake returned as the victim hero, his face still showing fading bruises that he made sure everyone saw. Teachers who once smiled at me now avoided eye contact. Meanwhile, Blake walked the halls collecting sympathy like trading cards. My social media exploded with notifications. Justice for Blake was trending locally. Someone had edited together a video making it look like I'd been stalking Blake for weeks. They used old photos from school events, circling my face in the background whenever Blake appeared. My accounts got suspended for violent content after mass reporting. Blake's edited version of events spread like wildfire. Leah's parents called my mom and asked me to stay away from the memorial service. They believed Blake's story that I'd been jealous of their relationship, that I'd attacked him in a fit of rage over unrequited love. The thought of them believing his lies while standing at their daughter's grave made me physically sick. An anonymous text arrived with a video attachment. My blood ran cold as I watched myself eating Blake from an angle I didn't know existed. The quality was too good for security footage. Blake had set up cameras at his own party, probably planning to record other things. Now that footage would bury me. My mom came home from her shift at the hospital in tears. Blake's mother, who served on the hospital board, had raised concerns about employee family violence. They placed her on unpaid administrative leave pending investigation of her parenting. 17 years of perfect employment employment records meant nothing against the word of a board member. I found Leah's journal tucked between my mattress and box spring where she'd hidden it during sleepovers. Reading her entries about Blake's escalating demands made me sick. She'd documented everything: the threats, the manipulation, the times he'd grabbed her too hard. She'd been building evidence but never got to use it. The courthouse steps were packed with news cameras for my first appearance. Blake arrived in a wheelchair he clearly didn't need, wincing dramatically as his father helped him up the ramp. Reporters shouted questions about his brave recovery. Inside, my public defender lasted exactly 5 minutes before announcing she had to withdraw due to a conflict of interest. Blake's father's law firm had just offered her partner a position. A young lawyer fresh from law school volunteered to take my case pro bono. She looked barely older than me, but warned that Blake's family had destroyed others before. She'd researched their history and found patterns of lawsuits and criminal charges that mysteriously disappeared. People who crossed them tended to leave town quickly and quietly. Blake's Instagram told a different story than his courtroom performance. Videos showed him at parties, dancing without his wheelchair, his cast mysteriously absent. His followers praised his strength through trauma, calling him an inspiration. When I tried to screenshot the evidence, I found myself blocked from viewing his profile on every device I could access. My mom's car was the next target. Thugs spray painted across the hood in red letters that dripped like blood. The security footage from our apartment complex corrupted right at the crucial moment. The gas station camera across the street malfunctioned. Even the traffic cam that should have caught the vandals mysteriously went offline for maintenance. 3 witnesses from the party suddenly remembered seeing me bring a weapon. Their stories matched too perfectly, rehearsed down to specific phrases. Within a week, each of them drove new cars to school. One got a BMW, another a fully loaded truck. The third moved to a bigger house with his family. The price of their testimony was obvious but unprovable. Leah's other friends started distancing themselves after whispered threats about college recommendation letters. Blake's family had connections at every university within 500 miles. One friend texted me an apology before blocking my number, explaining she couldn't risk her future. I understood, but it still stung. The local news ran a segment on the teen violence epidemic featuring my yearbook photo between 2 actual convicted criminals. They discussed warning signs of violent behavior while showing footage of Blake in his wheelchair. The reporter, who'd covered high school sports for years and definitely knew Blake could walk, never questioned the performance. Blake announced a memorial scholarship in Leah's name at a school assembly. He gave a speech about forgiveness and moving forward, wiping away tears that might have been real if you didn't know him. Leah's parents embraced him on stage, and I realized they'd been completely turned against me. The boy who drove their daughter to take her own life now controlled her memory. Late one night, I found a deleted Reddit post about Blake from 2 years ago. A girl described a similar situation: intimate photos, threats, public humiliation. The post vanished within hours, but I'd saved screenshots. Her family had moved across the country shortly after. When I tried to find her current information, I hit wall after wall. Attempting to contact the previous victim triggered immediate retaliation. A cease and desist letter arrived from Blake's family lawyer threatening harassment charges if I continued investigating. They'd been monitoring my online activity, watching every search and tracking every click. The walls were closing in. My college acceptance letter became a rejection overnight. The admissions office received an anonymous tip about my pending criminal charges. Blake's really committed to this wheelchair act. Showing up to court in one he clearly doesn't need while posting dance videos on Instagram is like wearing a fake cast to get out of gym class but then playing basketball at lunch. 4 years of straight A's and extracurriculars meant nothing compared to an assault case. My dreams of escaping this town evaporated with a form letter expressing their regrets. The bank called in my mom's mortgage 3 years early, citing a clause in microscopic print. The bank executive who made the decision golfed with Blake's father every Sunday at the country club. We had 30 days to pay in full or face foreclosure. My mom aged 10 years and 10 minutes reading that letter. Blake's social media became a shrine to Leah, filled with throwback photos and captions about cherishing memories. The same photos he'd threatened to distribute were now private trophies he probably still shared with his friends. He wore grief like a costume, perfectly tailored to hide the monster underneath. My lawyer received a job offer from a firm across the country with an impossible start date. Take the job immediately or lose the opportunity forever. The message was clear: abandon my case or sacrifice her career. To her credit, she stayed, but I saw the doubt creeping into her eyes. Blake's family had unlimited resources to make problems disappear. Blake started dating Leah's cousin Victoria within weeks of the memorial service. The resemblance made my stomach turn. Same auburn hair, same gentle smile, even the same nervous habit of twisting her bracelet when anxious. He paraded her around school wearing Leah's necklace, the one her grandmother had given her for her 16th birthday. Victoria posted photos of them together with captions about healing through shared grief, completely unaware she was dating her cousin's killer. My bedroom felt less safe after finding the tiny camera wedged behind my desk lamp. The tech expert I paid with my last $100 traced the serial number to a bulk purchase from Blake's father's construction company. They'd been watching me for weeks, recording every moment of desperation, every breakdown, every failed attempt to gather evidence. I destroyed the camera but knew others were hidden throughout our apartment. The court-mandated therapy sessions became another weapon against me. Dr. Benjamin asked leading questions about my childhood, my relationship with my father, any fights I'd been in before. He scribbled notes furiously when I mentioned a playground scuffle in 3rd grade, transforming it into evidence of lifelong violent tendencies. His reports would paint me as a ticking time bomb who finally exploded. Blake's friends started following my mom to and from work. They'd sit in the hospital parking lot, engines running, watching her walk to her car. Sometimes they'd follow her to the grocery store, always staying just far enough back to claim coincidence. She started taking different routes home, checking her mirrors constantly, jumping at shadows. A video surfaced on social media showing me threatening Blake outside the courthouse. My face was perfectly clear, my voice unmistakably mine, the words violent and specific. The technology was flawless. Even experts couldn't definitively prove it was fake. The prosecutor added new charges for witness intimidation based on the deepfake evidence. The plea deal arrived through my lawyer with an ultimatum: plead guilty to assault with a deadly weapon, register as a violent offender, accept 10 years of probation with strict conditions, or face potential life in prison when the jury inevitably convicted me. My lawyer's hands shook as she explained the terms. Blake's family had made sure I had no good options. My mom begged me to take the deal through tears that hadn't stopped for days. She'd already lost her job, her savings, and soon her house. She couldn't lose her son too. The weight of her desperation pressed against my chest, making it hard to breathe, but accepting meant Blake would win, would continue destroying lives while I rotted under legal restrictions. Blake's previous victim reached reached out through an encrypted message. Her family had been paid $200,000 to disappear and sign NDAs. Her name was Victoria, and she was still in therapy 3 years later. She wanted to help but was terrified of the legal consequences. Her father had a heart condition, and Blake's family had made clear what would happen if they violated the agreement. The school assembly on cyberbullying felt like a sick joke. Blake stood at the podium talking about the dangers of online harassment while I sat in the back, suspended but required to attend. He spoke about forgiveness, about moving forward, about honoring Leah's memory by being better. Teachers nodded approvingly while students who knew the truth stared at their phones, afraid to make eye contact with anyone. My childhood friend John showed up at my door one evening, nervous and sweating. He hugged me tight, whispering apologies through tears. When he pulled back, I saw the wire taped to his chest. Blake's father had threatened his scholarship, his family's business, everything they'd worked for. John ripped off the wire and crushed it under his heel, but we both knew the damage was done. They'd recorded enough to use against me. An anonymous payment cleared my legal fees overnight. $20,000 appeared in my lawyer's trust account with no trace of the source. She wanted to return it, suspicious of the timing, but we needed the money desperately. Every expert witness, every court filing, every hour of her time cost more than we had. We accepted the trap because we had no choice. Blake got careless during a live stream, laughing about something that made his friends uncomfortable. The video disappeared within minutes, but someone had screen recorded it. He'd been joking about Leah, making crude comments about the photos he still had. His therapist later explained it away as complicated grief processing, and the judge accepted that explanation without question. My father appeared at the courthouse after 10 years of absence. He'd left when I was 8, started a new family, forgotten we existed. Now he stood before reporters talking about his concerns for his son's mental health, how he'd tried to be there for me, how Blake's family had reached out in Christian forgiveness. Every word was a lie that served their narrative perfectly. The prosecutor added cyberstalking charges when they discovered I'd viewed Blake's public social media profiles. They painted it as obsessive behavior, evidence of continued harassment. The fact that Blake had posted public content meant nothing. Every click became evidence of criminal intent in their version of events. Blake's family filed a civil suit seeking millions in damages, medical bills, therapy costs, lost opportunities, pain, and suffering. They itemized every possible expense to bankrupt us completely. Even if I won the criminal case, which seemed impossible, the civil suit would destroy us. They had teams of lawyers while we had one exhausted recent graduate. The judge denied every motion to dismiss despite the complete lack of physical evidence. He owned a vacation home in the same development as Blake's family, attended the same country club, sent his kids to the same private school, but none of that constituted legal bias, apparently. The system was rigged at every level. A computer science student at school found something incredible in the recycling bin behind the library. Printed screenshots of deleted photos, metadata intact, showing Blake had distributed images of multiple underage girls. The evidence was clear, damning, enough to destroy him completely. But when the student tried to turn it over to police, the evidence mysteriously vanished from the station's evidence locker. 3 more girls came forward privately after hearing about the discovered photos. They'd been threatened, manipulated, had their photos distributed in smaller circles, but they were terrified to go public without protection the system wouldn't provide. Blake's pattern was clear, but patterns meant nothing without witnesses willing to testify. My mom discovered Blake's mother meeting with a judge at a hotel restaurant. She managed to take photos through the window showing them reviewing documents, sharing wine, clearly discussing more than casual matters. But photographing a judge wasn't illegal, and their explanation of discussing charity work for the country club was technically plausible. A local journalist named McJonathan started investigating Blake's family after receiving anonymous tips. He found patterns going back years, assault charges that disappeared, victims who suddenly moved away, witnesses who changed their stories. His editor unalived the story after a meeting with the newspaper's biggest advertiser. McJonathan was arrested 2 days later on substance charges after police received an anonymous tip about his car. The reporter's notes appeared in my mailbox the morning after his arrest. Pages of research showing Blake's father had covered up 3 separate incidents since Blake was in middle school. Each time the pattern was the same: threats, payoffs, legal manipulation. The evidence was overwhelming but useless without someone brave enough to publish it. I faced an impossible choice. The evidence could potentially free me, but using it would expose Blake's other victims to renewed trauma and legal retaliation. They'd trusted someone with their stories, and now I held their secrets. Protecting them meant accepting my own destruction. Late one night, I created a simple website and uploaded everything. The photos with metadata proving Blake's distribution, the victim testimonies with names redacted, the pattern of cover-ups, the financial records showing payoffs. Within 6 hours, the site had 50,000 views. Within 7 hours, Blake's cyber team had it removed completely. The FBI arrived the next morning, investigating interstate distribution of revenge adult film. Federal charges were different from local ones. Blake's father couldn't control federal prosecutors or judges. For the first time in months, I felt a spark of hope. But Blake's family had deeper connections than I'd imagined. Blake panicked when federal agents appeared at school. He found me in the parking lot, grabbing my arm with desperate strength. His offer was simple. He'd make the local charges disappear if I destroyed all evidence and stopped cooperating with federal authorities. His fear was real for the first time. I shook him off and walked away. The retaliation was swift. An anonymous tip led police to search my locker, where they conveniently found enough pills to charge me with intent to distribute. The planted evidence was obvious but impossible to disprove. Blake's family had turned me into a substance dealer with a few phone calls and a handful of pills. The federal investigation stalled when the lead agent was suddenly reassigned to an urgent case across the country. His replacement seemed less interested, less thorough, more willing to accept explanations that didn't add up. Blake's uncle sat on the Senate Judiciary Committee. The connections ran deeper than just local corruption. My mom was attacked in the hospital parking garage after her shift. The security cameras malfunctioned, but she described a professional who knew exactly how to hurt without leaving marks. Nothing was stolen. This was a message. Stop fighting or next time would be worse. She begged me to take whatever deal they offered. I went into hiding at a friend's empty cabin, but continued gathering evidence. Bank records showed Blake's family funding a complex network of intimidation. One Bitcoin wallet particularly caught my attention. Its name was Leah Laughs, a sick joke about the girl he'd driven to Sewerslide. Every transaction funded another attack on our lives. Leah's best friend Vicky finally broke her silence. Ha. Blake's panic when the FBI showed up is like when the teacher walks in and you're trying to hide your phone under the desk, but everyone can see you're clearly up to something. And then he tries to make a deal in the parking lot like some bad movie villain, except he forgot he's dealing with someone who's already lost everything. So what's he gonna threaten them with? Detention? She'd been recording Blake's threats to other girls for months, building evidence after Leah's death. Her recordings were clear, undeniable proof of his pattern, but she was terrified to come forward publicly, knowing what his family could do. Blake's father filed emergency motions to have me declared mentally incompetent. The therapy notes, taken out of context, painted a picture of violent delusions and paranoid fantasies. Even my grandmother, pressured through threats to her retirement home's funding, provided a statement about my concerning behavior as a child. The trial began with a jury pool mysteriously full of people with financial ties to Blake's family. 6 jurors had loans through banks his father controlled. Others had family members employed by their companies. My lawyer's objections were overruled. The judge saw no conflict of interest. The star witness who'd seen me attack Blake suddenly remembered new details. After his daughter received a full scholarship to an elite private school, his memory became crystal clear about weapons I'd never had, threats I'd never made. His testimony was devastating and completely fabricated. Blake took the stand and delivered an Oscar-worthy performance. Tears streamed down his face as he described living in fear, jumping at shadows, unable to feel safe. While the jury watched his breakdown, I saw him typing on his phone under the defense table, sending laughing emojis to friends about his acting skills. My lawyer presented our evidence methodically, but the judge sustained every objection from the prosecution. The jury never heard about Blake's history, never saw the photos he'd distributed, never learned about other victims. Every crucial piece of evidence was deemed inadmissible for increasingly absurd technical reasons. My mom testified about the harassment our family had endured. The prosecutor twisted her words, making her admit to family stress, financial problems, my father's absence. By the time he finished, she sounded like a negligent parent who'd raised a violent son. She left the stand in tears. The medical examiner admitted under cross-examination that the photos of Blake's injuries had been enhanced, but maintained the injuries were still severe. The prosecution's expert witness testified that the enhancement was standard procedure, nothing unusual. The jury nodded along, not understanding they were seeing manipulated evidence. An anonymous juror slipped a note to my lawyer expressing fear for their family's safety. The judge dismissed it as normal stress from civic duty, refusing to investigate further. The juror's husband received a promotion the next day. The message was clear: cooperate or suffer. Blake's ex-girlfriend Vita was supposed to testify for the defense. She dated him briefly after Leah, experienced his escalating demands, and escaped before he could destroy her. The night before her testimony, she was found dead in what police called a random mugging. Nothing was stolen. Her testimony died with her. I realized Blake's increasing desperation meant the federal investigation had found something significant. His family's usual methods weren't working on federal authorities. Every escalation, every new attack showed their fear. They needed me silenced before their empire crumbled. The prosecutor offered one final deal: plead guilty to all charges but serve time in a psychiatric facility instead of prison, treatment instead of punishment. My mom sobbed as she begged me to accept, our house having burned down the night before in an electrical fire that investigators couldn't explain. I refused, knowing Blake would destroy other girls if I gave up now. Closing arguments painted me as a violent vigilante who'd taken justice into my own hands. Blake sat with Leah's parents, holding their hands, playing the victim perfectly. But I caught Leah's mother looking at me with something like regret when Blake turned away. Maybe she was beginning to see through his act. The jury deliberated for only 2 hours. I prepared myself for the guilty verdict, knowing I'd likely spend decades in prison for trying to stop a predator. My mom held my hand as we waited, both of us understanding that Blake's family had won. Then the bomb threat came. The courthouse evacuated just as the jury was about to deliver their verdict. The timing was too perfect, too convenient. Blake's family needed more time to ensure their desired outcome. As we filed out of the building, a court clerk brushed against me, pressing something into my hand. The USB drive in my palm felt heavier than it should have. Back at the motel room my mom had rented after our house burned down, I plugged it into my laptop with trembling fingers. Federal investigation files filled the screen. Surveillance footage, bank records, victim statements. Blake had been recorded with multiple minors, his father's payments traced through shell companies. The evidence was staggering. I uploaded everything to 12 different cloud services, emailed copies to 3 local news stations, and sent the files to every victim advocacy group within 200 miles. This time, Blake's cyber team couldn't suppress it all simultaneously. Within hours, reporters were calling the federal prosecutor's office demanding answers. Blake's family attempted to flee that evening. Security footage from the private airport showed them loading suitcases into their jet, Blake limping dramatically for the cameras even while carrying heavy bags. Federal agents arrived just as they were boarding, their passports already flagged in the system. Blake's mother screamed about constitutional rights while agents led them away in handcuffs. The local police raid on Blake's house uncovered more than anyone expected. Hidden hard drives contained hundreds of photos from dozens of victims spanning 5 years. His father's home office held detailed records of payoffs, threats, and cover-ups. What started as revenge adult film distribution had evolved into something darker, a pattern of predation protected by wealth and connections. My mom revealed herself as the anonymous donor who'd paid my legal fees. She'd secretly mortgaged her mother's house, the one thing she'd inherited, because she couldn't watch me fight alone. Her sacrifice broke something inside me. We held each other in that cheap motel room, both crying for different reasons. Blake's arrest made the local news, though his family's influence kept it from going further. He cried real tears as federal marshals led him away, no longer performing for cameras but genuinely terrified. His designer clothes replaced with orange jumpsuit, his carefully styled hair messed from processing. The other inmates already knew what he'd done. The federal prosecutor offered me immunity in exchange for testimony about the local corruption. I spent 3 days in a conference room describing every threat, every act of intimidation, every abuse of power. My voice cracked talking about Vita's death, about the other girls too scared to come forward. The prosecutor took notes with grim determination. Blake's mother offered me $10 million through intermediaries to recant my testimony. The desperation in their approach showed how much evidence the federal investigation had gathered. I refused through my lawyer, knowing money couldn't bring Leah back or undo the damage to so many lives. The federal trial drew Blake's victims from across the state. Girls who'd been silenced for years found strength in numbers, testifying one after another about his patterns of manipulation and abuse. abuse, the courtroom filled with their families, all carrying similar stories of threats and cover-ups. Blake sat at the defense table, no longer smirking, finally understanding consequences existed even for him. The judge, a federal appointee with no local connections, allowed every piece of evidence Blake's money had previously suppressed. The jury saw the photos, heard the recordings, reviewed the financial trails of intimidation. Blake's father's lawyer argued entrapment and technical violations, but the evidence spoke louder than legal maneuvering. Blake received 40 years in federal prison with no possibility of early release. The verdict came down on what would have been Leah's 19th birthday. Her parents sat in the gallery, finally understanding who their daughter's killer really was. They found me afterward in the courthouse hallway, their apologies mixing with shared grief. Blake's father faced his own trial for obstruction of justice, witness tampering, and conspiracy. Without his network of influence, he looked small in his orange jumpsuit. The judge sentenced him to 15 years, his legal career destroyed along with his freedom. His wife fled to a non-extradition country with hidden assets, abandoning both husband and son. The civil suits from Blake's victims drained what remained of the family's local assets. Properties sold at auction, bank accounts frozen, investments liquidated to pay damages. The empire built on intimidation crumbled within months. Their country club membership revoked, their name removed from hospital wings and scholarship funds. Victoria, Leah's cousin, testified about her relationship with Blake. She discovered his true nature just before the federal investigation began, finding photos on his phone of other girls, including her cousin. Her testimony helped establish his pattern of targeting vulnerable girls connected to previous victims. She thanked me afterward for saving her from becoming another statistic. Prison proved harsh for Blake. A leaked video showed him in protective custody, crying and begging guards for transfer to a different facility. The other inmates knew his crimes involved minors. His pretty face that once charmed so many girls now made him a target. Justice came in forms the legal system couldn't provide. I returned to school after charges were dropped, but everything felt different. Students whispered when I passed, some calling me a hero, others wondering if I'd really struck Blake that badly. Teachers treated me with careful distance, unsure how to handle someone who'd been through so much. Normal teenage life felt impossible after everything. A victim advocacy group offered me a scholarship to attend college out of state. They specialized in helping those affected by revenge adult film and cyber abuse. The opportunity meant leaving everything behind, starting fresh where nobody knew my story. My mom encouraged me to take it, knowing we both needed distance from the memories. Blake's first letter from prison arrived 6 months later. Pages of rambling apologies, claims of reformation, requests for forgiveness. I burned it unread at Leah's grave, watching his words turn to ash and drift away on the wind. Some messages didn't deserve responses. Other victims reached out through social media, sharing their stories and thanking me for giving them courage to speak up. A support group formed locally for those affected by Blake's crimes. We met monthly in a church basement, sharing experiences and healing together. The number of attendees grew as more girls felt safe coming forward. My mom got her job back with full back pay after the hospital board underwent restructuring. Blake's mother's influence had evaporated with her flight from the country. Co-workers who'd avoided my mom during the trial now offered support and apologies. She returned to work with her head held high, her reputation restored. I spoke at my high school about the cost of seeking revenge, standing in the same auditorium where Blake had given his fake memorial speech. I admitted that beating him had felt satisfying in the moment, but brought consequences I never imagined. Violence had made me like him in ways that still haunted me. The students listened in silence, understanding the weight of choices. Graduation day arrived with bittersweet emotions. I walked across the stage wearing the same tie from Leah's funeral, her photo tucked in my cap. Her parents attended, sitting with my mom, all of us bound by loss and hard-won justice. Blake's empty seat in the graduation program served as a reminder of consequences. 5 years have passed since that night I hit Blake outside his party. I work as a counselor now, helping teens navigate healthy relationships and recognize warning signs of abuse. Blake serves his time in federal prison. His father died in custody under suspicious circumstances that nobody investigated too closely. The other inmates had their own justice system. Sometimes I wake at 3 a.m., remembering the police at my door, the weight of handcuffs, the fear in my mom's eyes. The trauma doesn't disappear just because justice was served. But then I remember the girls who thanked me, the victims who found their voices, the predator who can't hurt anyone anymore. I visit Leah's grave monthly, updating her on the lives she saved by documenting Blake's abuse. Her journal became evidence that protected dozens of girls. In seeking revenge for her death, I nearly lost myself, but ultimately found purpose. The violence I committed weighs on me, proving that in fighting monsters, we risk becoming what we hate. Yet sometimes, when the system fails, ordinary people must make extraordinary choices. Blake created his own ending the night he drove Leah to take those pills. I just made sure he lived to face it. The way Leah's journal turned into evidence that saved other girls is like she left behind the ultimate cheat sheet for catching bad guys. Thanks for following me in this story. Thanks for watching.